morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us today on this Thursday morning. Today we are talking about startup best practices when getting started. And PBO has partnered with LogicBoost Labs. And LogicBoost Labs was created by Jonathan Cogley to accelerate growth and pre-revenue for early startups. Jonathan had a successful exit with a cybersecurity startup in 2015. And so he decided in 2019 to found LogicBoost. And LogicBoost Labs is now kicking their process into high gear with more capabilities and resources to further increase the likelihood of a startup's success. And how they do that is that they have a team of amazing experts that have decades of startup experience. They have funding and connection resources. And what they do is they mentor and support in building a successful startup with their expertise. And then we have our very own Nicole Devine, who is coming to us from PBO Advisory Group in our new division. Our new division is the Human Capital Division, and we provide consulting services for human capital on a big picture, proactive and strategic approach. And how we do that is we strategically align each organization's goals with their people and how they achieve those goals and elevate their company culture through a viable employment brand from start to finish. And so we're going to talk a little bit today about startups and what LogicBoost Labs approaches to making them successful. And on the PBO side, the HR part of how we can help startups in their human capital side. A few housekeeping items. In your screen, you can see that there's a place for you to populate your questions. Please put them there, and I will monitor those questions and toss them to the various panelists. And with that, I'd like to introduce our panelists. We have Nicole with PBO Advisory Group and our Human Capital Solutions. And hold on one sec, I got to get Nicole's bio up really quickly. Sorry, little technical difficulty. So Nicole comes to us. She's our Chief People Officer. She has over 15 years of experience in human resource, and she closely works with leadership teams to progressively align organizational goals with HR goals. She excels in building teams and partnerships to execute forward-thinking initiatives and analyze potential issues and create solutions. Her experience puts an emphasis on corporate brand and culture while also looking at strategic planning and employment development. We also have Michael Milstein with LogicBoost Labs, who's the VP of Sales with LogicBoost. And Michael is a leader with over 10 years of experience in IT and SaaS sales, and he has experience in creating go-to-market sales strategies along with building and scaling sales teams. Michael has sold into SMB, mid-market, and enterprise markets as a direct seller and as a manager. And he is one of the original salespeople who worked with the founder of LogicBoost Labs, and he grew that company's revenue 15 times in 5 years and took the sales team from 2 people to 20 people prior to the sale of the organization to a private equity group. Michael takes pride in understanding the technology he represents and being able to effectively communicate the value of his technology, along with nurturing and helping salespeople grow as sellers and individuals. And we have Josh Franco, who is the VP of Marketing for LogicBoost Labs. And Josh is a marketing specialist with a demonstrated track record of success in digital and traditional marketing. For the last 15 years, Josh has been helping companies of all sizes build their brands and develop effective digital strategies regardless of their budget. At Psychotic, Josh established the foundations of the marketing team and created end-to-end marketing campaigns that focused on the growth and profitability of the company. His philosophy of design thinking, data decisions was the cornerstone of the company's industry-leading website. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Josh and he's going to talk a little bit about LogicBoost Labs model.
So I think, Fran, I appreciate the introduction. I think I'm actually going to jump off with the LogicBoost model. Not a problem at all. I understand how that was lined up. It was almost perfect for Josh to jump right in after that last introduction. But no, I appreciate the introduction. We're super excited to be here and be able to chat through kind of what we're doing with startups, how we've seen startup success, and really what differentiates LogicBoost from, I guess, some of the other models that are out there, as you guys can see in your screen. So essentially, the reason LogicBoost was founded is because Jonathan, our founder, after he exited Thycotic in around 2015, 2016, served as a mentor to a bunch of other incubators and startup accelerators for a period of like 2 to 3 years. And after speaking with, I think, 200 to 300 plus companies, an hour each, once a month with some of these companies, he realized that something was really broken in this process. What value was he actually providing these organizations outside of an hour of his time, and what value was he actually receiving back from them, right? He kind of just have the call, move on to the next one, et cetera. So with that, what he decided, and really where we were born out of, is saying, okay, well, you have all these other programs, at least on the front end, startup accelerators, incubators, angel investors, friends and family. They can provide capital, but are they really providing more than just capital and mentorship, right? Are they actually providing go-to-market strategy? And then if you take a deeper dive into like venture capital and private equity, venture capital, really their goal is say, here's a bunch of money, here's a bunch of connections, now go and make it happen. Private equity is a little bit different. Here's a bunch of money, we're going to take over your company and then we're going to run it for you. And so startup accelerators really kind of fit that post-angel and that pre-VC, pre-private equity realm. And what we're trying to do and differentiate is say, okay, here's cash on your balance sheet. And additionally, what we're going to do is we built a team of experts from sales and myself, marketing with Josh, Caitlin on customer success, and Chris in our technical CTO position to really bring that strategy of saying, hey, you want to get to $1 million in ARR, which is typically the toughest route for startups to get to, or the toughest route for startups as they get off the ground and before they kind of take that next leap. Let's come in and help smooth out those road bumps and those roadblocks and try to get you there as quick as possible. And so far, we just brought on 3 new startups, I believe, in the last 3 to 4 months. But prior to that, we had about 4 startups. 2 of them are in a late stage seed round and or early Series A round, getting that next set of investments. So we're seeing tremendous success with the program so far, which is really exciting. And so what I want to discuss next are some of the best practices when starting out as a startup founder, as you look to scale your business, whether or not you're looking for additional funding from some of the previous stated mediums to get capital and or experience. But if you're going to be starting out, you're going to be raising capital, you're going to be bootstrapping. How do you really focus on what's important? And how do you know that you're starting it? You're in a startup mode, right? So the first thing you're really going to need is you're going to need an MVP. An MVP is a minimum viable product. This really just states, hey, I'm here, I can actually sell something. We have tons of conversations. Last year I had 75 to 100 different conversations with startups that would come to us. Of them, 12 to 15 kind of made it into our cohort process. But you couldn't believe the number of conversations I had where people were coming to me with ideas. And they were fully baked ideas, but they didn't have anything really to give. So the first thing you're going to need is you're going to need a product to sell. And that's today, if someone's going to hand you money, can you give them a product and they can start utilizing that product? The next thing we really like to discuss in talking to startups, and this is even in kind of the initial phases before they even come on board, even if we don't engage with them as a portfolio of LogicBoost Labs, is saying, how do you protect yourself? How do you protect your business? And one big piece is qualified small business stock, or QSBS. And the idea behind this is we always suggest, and it's actually a requirement for all of our portfolio companies, is to be a C Corp. And when you become a C Corp, there are just an immense number of benefits to startups, and one of them is QSBS. And the big piece here is that you can actually take, as a founder, the first $10 million on an exit, so whether that's a sale, whether it's an acquisition, whatever it may be, those dollars are actually tax-free to the business as a founder, which is really exciting. So it's one thing that Jonathan talks about. He kind of kicks himself in his previous business for not becoming a C Corp prior to the acquisition by private equity. But it's something that we always advise, just because that's a lot of money that you can save. And it can really help you either drive the next startup founders. A lot of our entrepreneurs want to go on to something bigger and better or start it over again. It can really help you in that process. Or if you just want to kick back and relax, it can also get you there as well. And the last piece we kind of discuss as a best practice is just be very careful about how you give equity. A lot of times when founders come to us, if it's not a founding team, if it's a single sole founder, a lot of times they're taking angel investment from friends and family. And what they do is they kind of just dole out equity as if they're kind of lollipops on the sidewalk, right? And it gets kind of, it can be very wary for future investors, because if you look at the cap table and you see that there are 4 or 5 people that own a collective 25, 30, 40% of the business, it's really just going to throw up a red flag for any potential investor, and they're going to probably stop the conversation there, maybe give you a little strategy mentorship, but they're not going to really entertain any idea of investment, because there's just not enough equity for that investor. And then as you continue to grow, there's not enough equity to give out for strategic positions in the business. Consequently, if you're a 2-3 person founding team, all of a sudden equity starts to become very, very slim. So also, again, for that investor to come in and say, hey, we want a big piece of the company. We're going to be investing either a lot of cash or cash and time. We need to make sure that there's enough equity for other investment partners, but also an option pool for additional strategic hires as the organization continues to grow. And then as we continue to move on, one thing that we might be back, it's not a big deal. One thing that I believe specifically, obviously I'm the vice president of sales at LogicBoost Labs, but sales is actually extremely key to the growth of your business. If there is no revenue, there is no company. Countless times we talk to organizations, to founders who say, I just need to continue to iterate on my product. I need to continue to build a better product. And they're kind of under that mindset of, if you build it, they will come. Unfortunately, we're kind of beyond we're beyond that process now with startups, right? I mean, maybe 10, 15 years ago, you have a good enough product, maybe good enough market awareness. You'll see people or organizations come to buy your product, but right now we're beyond that. There's just so much noise in the marketplace that if you continue to iterate on your product, chances are someone else is going to come in, build it bigger and better, and sell it faster. And therefore, you're just going to be kind of left in the dust. And to that, revenue essentially is the strongest validation of market traction and product market fit. As we look at founders, one thing that we are looking for is we're looking for the kind of just who the founders are in general. Are they going to be easy to work with? Are they go-getters? Are they going to do whatever it takes to get it done? Another big piece, the second aspect of that, is product market fit. If they come into the market without something that is really differentiating and really showing the market that there's a problem that needs to be solved, then you're missing out on something big. And that kind of leads into the last piece, right? Revenue first, product second. And I kind of mentioned that. I can give you a quick anecdotal story. A company that was going through our cohort process, we actually ended up not working with them. But the moral of the story is we had a conversation with them 6 months after our last conversation as they're going through that process. And it's just a quick check-in. We do it with everyone who goes through our cohort process. Everyone who we communicate with is saying like, hey, how are things going? We always want to see founders succeed. And 6 months later, they still had not sold one aspect of the product. They had not sold one product at all. And I was completely baffled. Like, what happened? Did no one wanted it? Are people not liking it? Are they using competitors? What's going on? No, we completely stopped sales to continue to iterate on product. And so that was another 6 months of them just kind of almost, quote unquote, that sounds horrible, but dying on the vine, trying to build a product that they don't even know if customers want. If you're not out there, if you're not making sales, not getting customer feedback, you don't know what problems you're solving, because no one's giving that information to say, hey, this this is actually solving my problem. This isn't. You can then iterate on that. Customers are the best way to get that product feedback and continue to build on the product. And one of the last pieces, I know Josh is going to jump in and talk about this real quickly, is just about the data. So Josh.
Yeah, actually, Michael.
Before we hand over to Josh, I have a couple of questions in the audience. Maybe Michael, you could answer.
Oh, fantastic.
So when you talk about revenue and sales, how do you value? And I'm making an assumption, but intellectual property and product development. How do you value that or compare that from revenue and sales? We have a lot of clients that are similar that say we've got this great idea, we have all this IP. But, you know, what's the balance between IP and revenue and sales?
So I guess the short answer, and not to sound crass, but if the IP doesn't bring in any revenue, then you're not going to have anyone to continue to build the product, right? It's funny, as now we're in this world as investors and whatnot, looking at companies, I have countless conversations where people want us to sign NDAs prior to having the first conversation. And the first response is, hey, listen, we've been there, done that. You know, Josh and I were part of the first 10-person team that grew Psychotic. We don't want to go back to being founders again, like essential founders. It is a struggle, right? Like entrepreneurs are a special breed, right? And so you look at entrepreneurs and you have such respect for them. But the first thing is we don't want to go back and build that product, right? And the first part is that, and the second part is, if you don't build the product, someone else is going to do it, right? So if you have your IP, you're sitting on it, and you have all this stuff, and you want to sign NDAs, it's like, okay, great, go have different conversations. But if you're here with a product and you're ready to have that conversation, and you're actually bringing revenue in the door, that's going to be much more validation for any investor, and also just product market fit in general.
Cool. And you know, on the QSBS, it's been really interesting because we also have clients that take advantage of that, and there was a mad rush last year to do exits because the federal government was looking to sunset that program. Do you guys have any thoughts about that or the risks on that?
I am not aware of the government sunsetting the QSBS program. If so, I mean, it's a struggle. I mean, if you can get out now and make a little bit more money, is it worth it? Or make X number now, right? A bird in the hand is better than two in the bush. Then maybe, right? But if you're seeing, again, crazy product market fit, you're seeing traction in the marketplace, you're seeing crazy year-over-year growth, then kind of the bet might be say, hey, keep on going at it because the exit down the road might be a little bit greater than the one now. But that's the entrepreneurial mindset, right? It depends on who you are. If you're an entrepreneur, you're going to want to try to make this big. If you're in it for the short term, hey, take your money and run. I have no problem with that, right?
Yeah. All right. Well, with that, I'm going to pass it over to Josh. Sorry for the interruption, but thought we'd get these questions answered. Here you go, Josh.
Yeah, all good. Thank you. You know, as Michael was talking about the revenue first, product second, obviously I'm going to put a little asterisk next to revenue first, because one of the key things here is really having the data to understand where that revenue is coming from. So one of the things that we always talk about is attribution, because if we're talking about trying to project where revenue is going to be in a year and we want to maximize it or double it, the question becomes, how do we do that? And so we're really trying to understand that whole buyer's journey, and that's how somebody comes in the front door and becomes a lead or a prospect and eventually a customer. And without really having that data points, we can't figure out where they're coming from and how to maximize the dollars there. So just to add on to that good lead gen program and that good data, we're really talking about the scientific process. There's something that we assume about our customers, and then we're going to take that hypothesis, look at the data, and try to either confirm or disprove it. And that's the simple way to really get the most out of what you're already doing. And then just one example to kind of show how data can really make a big change in your overall dollars. I was working for Psychotic at one point, and we had this product page, which was one of the most key pieces to actually getting somebody to try and buy our product. And it had a very low conversion rate. people weren't filling out the form as much as we would have expected. And as we kind of dug into that, what we found is that there was such a high proportion of returning visitors, and at the same time, there was a high search for login on the site that kind of corresponded with that low conversion rate. And what it was is that current customers were coming to our product page trying to figure out how to log into the product. And so we actually had a potential blind spot, which we were able to fix and basically give our current customers a way to figure out how to log in. And our product page shot up 30% on the conversion rate. And we were able to confirm that our messaging was good, the product page was good. And it's something that we wouldn't be able to do unless we had a couple of different data sources and trusted our actual data to make the right decisions. Cool.
Fantastic. Thanks, Josh.
Yep.
And so to kind of kick it back to me for a quick second, and it goes back to the theme of revenue, right? And this is something that we learned at Thycotic, and I think Jonathan learned early on, and hence why he started to grow his sales team, was that if you as a CEO are unable to give 40 hours a week plus, 40 plus hours a week, yeah, 40 plus hours a week in sales and generating revenue, whether that's trying to find leads, whether it's closing deals, whatever it may be, then you need to hire someone who can. Because again, if you can't get revenue in the door as a CEO, you cannot pay your employees, you cannot pay the developers developing your incredible product, et cetera, right? So it really, really brings it back to that. If you are a CEO that can do 40 hours a week of sales plus do 40 hours a week of other stuff, hey, more power to you. But what we've noticed with a lot of our entrepreneurs and our founders is that it becomes very, very difficult very quickly. There's a lot that's going on in the business, a lot that needs to be managed. A lot of times as a CEO of a startup, you're not only the CEO, you're the CFO, you're the CMO, you're the COO. You're literally performing every single role, unless you're a technical founder, and then you're a CTO, right, or a CIO. So if you are unable to really dedicate your entire work week to a specific job function, and I think here sales is that important. If you cannot get revenue in the door, then you need to hire someone who is. And that kind of leads to the next point about being careful about who you hire. Really take a look and make sure that you're hiring someone that not only can do the job, but really fit your culture. So many times, I got burned about this a couple of times when I was younger and in a managerial role and hiring someone who I thought could bring the Rolodex. I actually saw a LinkedIn post of someone who I follow this morning mentioning, hey, that Oracle, SAP, big time Rolodex salesperson might seem like a real nice shiny object to a startup founder. But the thing about it is Rolodexes really don't get you anywhere unless it's a big VC like Andreessen Horowitz or Sequoia, Oaktree Cap. They don't really get you anywhere in the sales world. What gets you there is just like grit, having conversations with customers, being a doer, understanding the market, and then trying to figure out how to position your product to go to market in that sense. And then taking that feedback that you're getting from the market, you're getting from the customers, and then giving it to the product team, CEO in this case, to continue to build out, iterate on the product. A great story, one of the startups that we're working with right now who just jumped onto our program has been doing incredibly well by himself over the last 5 to 10 years. A couple of years ago, hired a salesperson who came in, had all the credentials, had the Rolodex, did everything, and essentially kept status quo in the organization. And so for that person, that was a big expense, right? 152, 250 grand they spent on time, effort, healthcare, all the fun stuff that goes around employing a person in the organization. And that's a big mistake. That's a very expensive mistake, that a startup founder cannot really afford. So as you're looking for someone to come in and run sales, if you're not going to as a CEO, look for someone who's a doer. Look for someone who's going to get on, who's not afraid to doing the grit work, but then also understands kind of the nuances of having to move through an enterprise organization to close deals. And then who's not afraid to step into that role as a leader in the organization as you continue to scale out. So I think that's also very, very important as you look to say, if I'm not doing sales, who can do sales in the organization? So on that, I'm going to kick it back over to Josh to really jump into buyer roles and marketing personas.
All right. Thanks, Michael. And just to add on to the hiring piece there, somebody who really understands the culture, whether it's a sales position or not, they're just going to do a much better job of understanding where the company is headed and kind of the values of the team. And they will actually, you don't have to manage them. They'll be doing the things and self-managing. So understanding that and being a good fit is super important. But on to buyer roles, marketing personas. And marketing personas is sometimes called customer personas, so I might use those interchangeably. Basically one of the biggest things here is you really want to understand your target audience and your target buyer. And that includes, not only what company or role they might have in it, but an idea of who they are, and really trying to dig into, what is it about their day-to-day that makes your product or solution so necessary for them. We've all seen enough movies and things at this point. The idea of, you sell a solution to a problem and not feature set or a product or technology. And so I think to that point, something that we see a lot of technical founders struggle with is that they want to run down the feature list when you say, what does your product do? Instead of actually, how does this solve my problem as a potential customer? And so when we actually start to dig into that, there's two sides of the same coin. And really what there is your customer personas, who this person is, what their job is, and kind of what their day-to-day looks like, maybe some of their interests. And on the other side, you have their buyer role, and that's how they fit into their company. You're starting to talk about the bureaucratic process, who they interact with, who's actually going to be able to sign off on the deal and get the process into an actual purchase. And it's interesting because if you start to really understand both of these, you can have conversations with these personas. I've seen teams put names to these personas. So in a cybersecurity company, it'll be Ian in IT. And what does Ian in IT like to read? What does he do in his free time? What's the problem on his day-to-day? And when we start to have conversations about, messaging or the product, we can say, hey, will Ian in IT actually appreciate that? And then on the flip side, maybe we understand that in the buying process, Ian, the IT guy, is just the champion. He's the one that's going to say, I need this product. He's going to, bring it to the table and keep talking about how much he needs it. But it could be Carol, the CFO, that's actually the buyer. And her role is to actually sign off on things. So the more you start to understand how these two things work together, who these people are, it just makes it a lot easier to really tailor your messaging, but also understand that you might have to help your champion talk to the CFO to get deals done quicker. Or, there could be other aspects here, and really just makes it a lot easier for you to burn through the sales process, make that a lot shorter. And, in the long term, as you really start to understand your audience and become a subject matter expert, that SME, what's going to happen is that these customers that you understand so well are going to become evangelists for you. So the easiest way to sell your product is to have somebody out there just talking about what a great product it is. And that's really the value of understanding your audience, understanding their problems, understanding how their organizations operate.
That's very interesting. We talk about that a lot, with various clients, and where the CFO, I'm guilty, is the bottleneck of that buying decision. So really talking about the value proposition to the finance people is really a good a good approach. So with that, we're going to turn it over to Nicole, and Nicole is going to talk a little bit really about the people that make the startup go. And Josh and Michael also referenced this a little bit as they were talking, but she's going to dig a little deeper.
Well, good morning, everybody. Thanks for having me on the panel. So one of the things that we see a lot, and specifically as we consult on some of these things for the startups, is we look at culture is really become a buzzword, and it's been something that we throw around sort of lightly, and what does it mean, and how do we tie these things in, and it can change over time. And so one of the things that we look at as your core is, what are your values, right? So we start with the core values that they serve as your North Star. That is the foundation of the sword you're willing to fall on. So the reason that those core values are so important is because they are the driver for any of the really difficult business decisions that you need to make. So when we look at hiring, we look at in reviewing anybody's performance, we look at rewarding performance, we look at recognition programs, we look at terminations, we look at any of those things. And that's not just singular to employees, that's also even core values of the sword we're willing, again, to fall on, even to lose customers. So I'll give you a quick example. Southwest Airlines, one of their core values is fun. And the CEO and the chair of that, of Southwest Airlines, anybody who's ever flown Southwest knows they're fun, they're light, they're airy, and that is woven through any of the fabric of anything that they do, including when they do the safety announcements, which typically one could argue is not that light, airy, and fun, but they tend to make it funny, and it's light, it's airy. And so what happened was a customer had written to the CEO saying, hey, this is not a laughing matter. This is not a joke. They shouldn't be joking about safety and us traveling and getting to our destination safely. And this CEO made a conscious decision saying this is a core value of ours to be fun. So enjoy United Airlines or American Airlines, and we wish you the best, but our core value, again, willing to lose a customer and not sacrificing what our core values are. So it's an incredibly difficult thing to do, but it really serves as your foundation and your North Star. So one of the things that's really important when you're sort of walking through these things is it represents who you are at your best. So you want to be ambitious, but realistic. And one of the things we often coach on is things need to be actionable, not aspirational. So culture is about the behaviors that we walk through and we can demonstrate throughout the life cycle of an employee, from the moment we reach out to you, right, all the way through the time you exit with us. And so these things should be something that is representative of you, but that you're also actually being able to demonstrate and have actionable items. So not things that are so aspirational that we're not really actually able to achieve them, because you'll just end up having the counter effect, which is we're not actually doing what we are out intending to do. So the business intent is actually what I think is often missed when we look at core values. The intent of why you got into doing what you're doing, what is the mission of this, what is your purpose of, what is the intent of why you started this company? That really should be the driver of why you have the value sets that you have. And so I think that element is often missed sometimes when we look at core values. And the last component is there's a difference between startup, that spirit, that soul, that grit. Any of us who, I've actually owned my own company, and I will tell you the grit that has to go into as an entrepreneurial, the up and down roller coaster ride where you're, amazing one night and the next day you're like, I have no idea what I'm doing. That level of grit to endure through that has to be exponential as an entrepreneur. And so there's a difference between that type of spirit and soul and the actual culture and the core values that actually carry you through, which are actually more sustainable. So it's important to understand the distinction and the difference when you're looking to align the two of those things. Okay, hold on, I gotta switch my screen so I can see where I'm at. Okay, so here's what I think is fascinating as we talk about branding, as we talk about, and I often will coach CEOs and leadership teams so that they have a frame of reference of methodology. So when we look at culture, and core values is the North Star, it is tied into the overall culture strategy. But employment brand, you have an employment brand whether you think you do or not, whether it's intentional or not, you have one. And it's very similar to the brand, just like when you develop a customer product. It's very similar in terms of methodology. The employment brand is the same. So in human resources, I often will coach leaderships, transformational leaders to think in an HR perspective of the employees, the staff, our stakeholders, they are our clients. We have to have incredible customer service. And so we look at, when you look at the relationship of the methodology of when you develop a product, you develop a brand, let's say it's a widget and it's got to be pretty and it's got to be this, and we look for these customers that we would align with, and here's our target market and all of those things. That methodology holds true even with the people that we actually want to bring on board to do business with us. And actually, so just how you would look for a certain customer, that's also how we would align and look at our core values of who we want actually to work with and to bring it over the finish line for us. So the brand itself looks very similar in terms of methodology, sort of the same customer brand product development that you would go through, right? So how do we represent ourselves in the community and the stakeholders, who are our internal customers, our current employees, and who are our external customers, the employees we're actually trying to attract and retain. So really what's really important as you walk through that, I often tell people, what is your natural stride? Why are you going up current? What do we do really well naturally that is inherent to us, which is what differentiates us in the market? It's no different than a brand product again. What separates you? Why you? It's the same thing as an employment brand. What is the value proposition that we are offering you that you benefit to come work for us? So I'm going to do a shameless plug for PBO, and that's not with intent, but it's because it's one that's personal to me, so I can just share a little value proposition about why with PBO, one of the values we have of being philanthropic or communities or et cetera, building up communities, that really aligns with my core values personally. But one of the values that PBO can offer me as an HR professional that no other company really can offer me is that I get to see an amazing amount of industry exposure, small company, big companies. I get to see different business models, different technology platforms, different leadership models. And so I get this exponential professional growth that PBO can offer me because they put me in, again, their natural current is they can offer that as part of their employment to me. That is a huge value proposition for me that is unique to PBO that separates them in the market for how we attract and retain our employees. So it's the same sort of methodology when you think about what is it that we do really well, what is our natural current, and how do we build within the natural current as our foundation for that. So don't try to be something you're not. That's never sustainable. It never works. You're never going to be a better anybody else than a better you, right? So you really want to make sure that when we look at things, and again, tying through the fabric of how do we attract, how do we retain, how will we engage, all the things that we do through the life cycle of the employment from a brand perspective, from the moment we reach out to you, through the entire tenure of the life cycle, whether way we compensate you from a philosophical perspective, the way we provide benefits to you. Again, if we're about wellness and community, then maybe one of our benefits would be we look at wellness programs, we look at philanthropic communities, we give you paid time off to go volunteer, whatever sort of aligns those things so that we're sort of staying within the culture and the core values and the value propositions of why you want to come work for us. So again, tying back into your culture, incredibly important. And again, most importantly, please know, even if you don't have one with intent, you do have one. So it's important to understand that even when you're not working on one, it's happening naturally. So you want to make sure if you're going to have a vote in that process, maybe you pay attention to how you want it to actually land. Okay, next up, Michael, let me see it. Common pitfalls. Okay, so common pitfalls. For any of those of you who have been through the entrepreneur cycle, you know that one of the most painstaking things that you can go through are these huge pitfalls that, man, had I known, or had I had a second to actually, you're so busy that you think, geez, had I really had the foresight to see these things. So one of the things that I often see in startups is there's really no strategy. And when we have no strategy in terms of culture and, again, employment branding, and how are we really giving thought to what we want to reflect into the world, it's really difficult for us to align. So if we don't have a North Star to align to, there's really no way to align. And so often what we see is sort of anybody who's willing to get in there and get their hands dirty, but there's no strategy to how we're either developing culture or how we are aligning culture. And so it begins to flail. It's not sustainable. And then there's no alignment. So you begin to make bad hires. As Josh and Michael were mentioning before, you make bad hires and they ultimately become detrimental to your business. So from an opportunity cost of maybe time lost that you could have missed, your time to market is affected, all of these other things that have a natural business impact that you didn't intend, but because we didn't have clarity and clear definition on what our values were, we flail in that regard. So right-sizing employees is really about workforce planning. It's really about right-sizing the organization to the corporate goals. And so when you look at what are our business objectives, and you look at how do we make sure we have the right people in the right, that whole saying we all hear, right person, right bus, right seat, is it the right, all of those things. Again, having clarity, this is really driven by role and responsibility. So as mundane as it sounds, a job description really gives perfect clarity on what you actually need. And there should have one for what you're currently doing and then in alignment with where you plan on going. And those things are not going to look the same. So then it comes down to the real stretch that I see all the time, which is we gift titles to people. So you start in one frame of reference where people are amazing at getting you off the ground. And now we move into the next business cycle. And what happens is, again, job description, where I need you to be currently versus where we plan on being. Those things become incongruent. And so you gift this title to somebody who's, because for loyalty and they've been really awesome with getting you where you are, but may not be necessarily the person and at the time to be able to close the gap in terms of training for skill that you can get them to where you need them to be. And so those are very, again, North Star, very difficult conversations to have of how will we, from a culture standpoint, grow our people, if that's our culture. Then we need to build into the infrastructure of making sure those things happen. And so it's about being cognizant of those things and again, tying through the fabric of the culture piece to make sure that we are in fact fostering the environment from a value perspective we said we would do. So with that comes inflated salaries, and then ultimately, again, opportunity cost impact business, like not doesn't really work out well. So, and you're really not doing the employee a favor by gifting them a title of not being able to live up to what really the expectation is. So it's really, just about having tough, transparent conversations. And again, back to your North Star. So one of the really important things that I often will tell CEOs is when people don't leverage a subject matter expert at the higher level gaps. So bringing in a fractional CFO, bringing in a fractional CPO to help you, not all of the time, but to be an advisor to you, to give you foresight so that you have some sort of landscape of what the bigger picture looks like. So often when you're an entrepreneurial, and if you haven't done this before, you're sort of flying the plane and fueling it at the same time. But what subject matter experts and advisors do for you is they sort of give you some foresight of what's happening off that cliff coming on the next round. So they help you plan better, they help you put strategy together, they help you think through some of these things that you're trying to achieve. So if not but for anything else, surround yourself by people that are, I always say if I'm the smartest person in the room, I'm in the wrong room. So it's really important to surround yourself with incredible resources where you actually may not be amazing at something. Please surround yourself with people who are. So what is a good barometric measure of good culture? I get this question all of the time. Well, how do I know if we have good culture? So one of the barometric measures that I often tell people is, it's kind of like when you have a change management at the top. Something happens, right? Oh, this guy got terminated. Oh, we're apparently selling this product now. Oh, and the feeling of the employee comes back as, oh, I'm the last to know. That's just how we do things around here. That's pretty symbolic of your culture. Or conversely, hey, yeah, no, they told us, we had a rollout meeting, we had a town hall, they laid everything out, everybody's perfectly clear on what we're doing. Yep, everybody's on board because that's just how we do things around here. that's a real symptom and a good barometric measure of really is your culture doing exactly the way that landing the way you want it to land, because that's the biggest deficit, right? The delta is aspirational, where did we think we were going to be, but are we actually actionable, and is it landing the way that we intended it to land? So that's my spiel on culture and and startups.
And
wow, there's lots
Nicole,
to think about. It's interesting. Go ahead.
Sorry, Fran. No, I was just saying, Nicole, to add to that, the one piece you talked about that really resonated, and I think especially with these startups, is the gifting of titles with this inflated salary. It's way easier to give someone a title, and it's way harder to take away that title. And the the typical situation is that the COO, CFO, CRO today is not the CRO, CFO, CEO, or COO of tomorrow. I think we've seen CEOs kind of ride that wave, and because they're typically the visionary, they're the hardest worker, they put in they have the most grit, yada yada yada. But when they bring in these other titles at a startup phase and they give them that big name, it's tough, because when 0 to 1 million is one thing, 1 to 5 is completely different, 5 to 10, and you're going to need different leaders at those points, right? And to take away that title, it's a big ego bust for certain people if they can't handle it.
Right.
And it's just going to your point of the culture, then it's going to destroy the culture because you're taking away titles, all that fun stuff. So I think that's extremely important to harp on. I apologize for jumping in, but
No, you're all good. I mean, it's really
huge.
true, and there's this whole talk about subject matter experts. We're all talking about that. You have to have your sales subject matter expert. You have to have your grit. Startup is a little different than a fully baked organization. And so one of the things and questions is, and Michael and Josh, you can both weigh in. Where do you think that founders stumble the most during those early phases of startup?
Yeah, I think I can take this one. It's a lack of focus. So one of the great things about being a startup, especially when you're looking at larger companies, maybe in the same space, you're super agile and you can go off in any direction that you want. If I had $1 for every time somebody said pivot, that would be my own. But you can get into a mindset where you just something's not working, and so you keep pivoting and trying to find something that works. So for a lot of times, people are chasing trends. They're where things were maybe 5 years ago, and they're using that as a measuring stick for what they're trying to do. What we say is, it's that idea of hockey where you want to skate to where the puck's going to be and not where it's at. So if you're ahead of things and you're going to be a leader and not chasing things, you're just going to be much more successful.
And so this is kind of for all of you, but as you see the company shift and pivot, does your culture need to change as that happens?
I'll go first if that's okay. So,
yeah.
So I think what's a distinguishable difference again is talking about the core value piece. As your company changes, the values itself, again, driven by business intent, don't necessarily change. Now, you may add, you may clarify, you may articulate, but the culture itself naturally will have a growth period. As you cycle through different growth, it will have a natural transition itself. And so I think that's the part that is important when you come back to, but who are we at our core? And how do we keep that core in place and expand the culture piece to tie those things in? So those things do change over time. And again, core value being a function of culture, but the culture itself, here's the reality. Every time you add a new employee, there's a culture shift. That's the truth. And the realities are, you don't want to control the behavior, for instance, of what you're saying. The biggest mishap I see is defining what the behavior should look like. I think that's actually a deficit of the interpretation of core value. a core value is set, let's say empathy, for instance, right? And when you control and define for employees what you think that should look like, what you miss is the opportunity to align yourself with people who are cultural contributors, who actually add and expand how awesome empathy can look in different ways. So I wouldn't limit yourself in that regard. And so as a natural byproduct of that, it begins to shift the way the culture happens and the way it looks. So that's my 2 cents.
We could probably talk about culture and startup all day long, but I'm going to shift a little bit because we have some other questions here. Michael, how does LogicBoost Labs evaluate a startup for your cohort process? And even further to that, do you all look at core values as something in your consideration of a cohort process?
Yeah, that's a great question. So to answer the last part first, actually, no, let's start from the beginning. What we do initially, and I kind of mentioned this earlier, is when we're looking at companies for our cohort process and hopefully become portfolio companies of LogicBoost Labs, we really care about the founder. And kind of tying into that, like if we don't mesh with the founder, if we don't see that the founder has some of those like key attributes you're looking for in an entrepreneur, and I think a big one of them is the ability to kind of put your ego aside and continue to iterate and get better. I think that's kind of like the core piece that we're looking for is someone who kind of meshes with our team, someone who obviously is, pardon my French, but our motto is like, do whatever it takes to get shit done, right? As long as you can get shit done, like that's what we care about. And then obviously the other things kind of fall into place. Additionally, product market fit. We want to make sure that there's some need. A lot of the founders that are in our portfolios, they actually experience the problem themselves. And, we kind of take that from our roots. Our old startup was founded out of a dev consultancy shop where Jonathan was trying to solve for a problem that he was experiencing internally. And it was like, wait, other companies have to solve this problem, have to experience this problem as well. And we should try to solve for that problem. So when we are looking for founders, it's kind of that initial piece I mentioned, product market fit, and then hopefully we're looking for founders that have experienced that problem in the past, because that leads into having a subject matter expert or SME that can help lead the organization. You want someone who's kind of like entrenched in the market, who understands, who's talking to the different players in the market, whether they're competitors or complementary type of organizations, and really has a foothold in there. So I think that's kind of like the initial pieces that we're looking for, and then kind of hard technical pieces that we're looking for. They have to have an MVP. So we actually, as I mentioned earlier, we don't really move to that cohort process unless they have an MVP. They have to have some sort of validation, which refers back to that product market fit. That could be letters of intent. That could be, 1 or 2 pilot customers. It could even be revenue, right? So if they have revenue, even better, right? It shows that people are willing to get out that checkbook and pay for that. And then they have to be B2B SaaS. So and that's business to business, software as a service. Not everyone may know that on the attendees on the call. But the idea behind that is that's really what we were derived at. That's where our expertise comes from. We moved from a one-time purchase and support product company to a pure SaaS offering. And Josh and I were part of that, as well as Caitlin. We're a part of that transition from the sales side, the customer side, and the marketing side. So that's really where our expertise lies. And so those are really the core pieces that we look for when we're evaluating a startup.
So to paraphrase, you do actually have some core values that you're looking at, when you're looking at investors, because you're really looking at those founders and saying, they're not ego driven. They have purpose and grit, which we all know in a startup is something that's pretty necessary.
Yeah, and we're not looking for yes people. We don't want our founders to be yes people, to just agree with everything that we say. We're open for the challenge. We want people to kind of push back and understand why and ask those questions. But at the end of the day, we want to look at them to be the SME in their specific area. We kind of look at ourselves to be SMEs within our specific area. So as long as we can come together and have those conversations and drive the business forward, I think that's extremely important.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. And so I think I will ask each of you the same question, and I'll start with Josh, and then we can go to Michael and Nicole. Where do you see the common? What is the commonality when you see between successful startups that either drag or never take off and good ones? What do you see are common practices that can either really launch a startup or drag them down?
Yeah, I think you could sum it up as being afraid to jump. Having that decision paralysis and being afraid to fail, you're just not going to move as fast as you need to be successful. And to that point, you need to be failing fast, because that's how you really learn and do better. I think, one of the things that founders struggle with is making some of those big decisions that could result in failing. And you can delay those decisions to get more information so that you make a more informed decision. But at the end of the day, being afraid to fail is going to stop you from being successful.
Yeah.
Great
I would
point.
say, Josh,
I mean, it's kind of like that risk assessment. What can you lose by jumping, right? What's the worst that can happen? Michael, what do you think?
Yeah, to tie into the back end of Josh, I think it's like, Josh was saying, is you got to fail. And if you're going to fail fast. Because if you take a while to continue to fail and you don't want to admit it, then you're just going to spin out of control, and that's when you're going to drag. If you can fail fast and put another $1 into Josh's bank and then pivot, I think that's very important. One of our portfolio companies, I mean, in the first 9 months I worked with them, they pivoted probably 3 to 5 times. So let's just land on 4. They pivoted 4 times. So much to the point where I'd end up on a call and the deck would be different and we were pitching a new product and I was unaware of it. So communication is also very key within the organization. No, but that's all in good fun. But they pivoted and they listened to the market. So they weren't afraid to go and take a chance and change kind of what their offering was. And the market said, hey, that's not what we need. I like that. Let's iterate on that. So we iterated, we pivoted, and that's where they are now, getting a late stage seed round that's really going to help them blow the doors open. And they've landed in a place, and I'm super excited. We'll be announcing it probably in the next month or two. But they've landed in a place where they have incredible product market fit, where their frenemy organizations and complementary solutions, the CEOs of these companies who are either VC backed or very big, current long-standing Fortune 500 organizations, are saying this is like the missing piece in this link. So to kind of tail into that, right? It's if you're going to fail, like Josh said, fail fast and don't be afraid to make that pivot, listening to the market and hearing what they need.
Nicole, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I was going to say, so naturally I think of it through the people function. And so the thing that I see the most, and it's typically why I'm called in, is really the leadership piece. And so the leadership, surrounding yourself at a leadership level of, again, whether it's subject matter experts that are advisors that advise or whatever that looks like for you. And I think one of the things that is important to note, and I've seen a few rounds, is founders often think that they actually are the ones to bring the company to the next level. And sometimes you're not. And so sometimes it's about having the foresight of a leader to understand it's not about touting what you can do. It's about touting how you can inspire others around you to do what needs to get done and to get it to the next level. And sometimes that does not mean, as the founder, you're necessarily the best person to take the company to the next round. And so it's having the company first mentality of what do we need to do to actually get this over the line, outside of ego of that may not be you. And that's okay, because that's not the point. And so I often say it's better to be part of something, to have part of something, than all of nothing. So if you want to actually be able to push the needle and get to the next level, you need to be perfectly clear in terms of talent and who can actually bring you to the next round from a leadership level. And sometimes, you are faced with back to gifting titles of, you put these big elevated titles in when really, are they a chief revenue officer? are they a chief technology? And really it's at the detriment to the company because they really aren't, you're shorting yourself because you want to reward them for being so loyal to you, right? And being through the late nights and the grit and all of those things. But it's about, again, aligning yourself with the values of, but we need people who understand the large goal, who want to get things done and bring it to the next level. And sometimes that may not include me. And that's a very, again, back to North Star, very difficult decision to make. So that's where I see it capsize the most, is having the chutzpah to say, as a foundational North Star, I'm willing to make the tough choices, including myself. And it may not be me. And so I need to then bring someone in who can get it to the next round. That's your job.
Yeah, and that's really a great segue into, why LogicBoost Labs is so excellent for their cohorts, is because they have so much experience in this, that they can help mentor and guide, those entrepreneurial companies from one stage to the other, driving revenue and then moving to the next stage. So we are running out of time. If anyone has a B2B SaaS company that is, pre-revenue or has some small revenue, the contact information for Michael and Josh are on the next slide. Please connect with them. They do also have a website where you can go and input your information. And it has been a really, thank you, Nicole, for talking about, how we as startups start with strategy and brand and core values and move through subject matter experts like Josh and Michael at LogicBoost to get them to the finish line. So we really appreciate all of you for your time, and what a great dynamic conversation. I could talk about startups all day. It's my favorite kind of business. But we have, I know everyone has meetings to get to, and it was really great to spend the time this morning, and thank you all for your expertise, and best wishes to all of you. Good luck. Take care.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Fran. Thanks, Nicole. Talk to you later, Josh.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody.